Okay. Hi, I'm Brian Dolan, CEO and founder of WorkReduce, and welcome to WorkReduce Live. This is the, I believe, fourth in our series of panels covering topics of interest to the ad industry, where we're bringing together some of the best minds and leaders of the industry to talk about what's going on, offer advice, and of course, take your questions about what's going on and have a great discussion. So today, we're very excited to have two great guests with us. The first is Rishad Tabaccowala. Rishad is the former CEO of Publicis, and more recently, the author of Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data, a really fascinating take and an increasingly timely one, which we'll talk about, which I think a lot of us are really interested as business owners and advertisers in some of the questions that he's raising in this book. I'm also joined by John Durham. John is the CEO of Catalyst, a branding agency based in San Francisco, and a friend of WorkReduce. This is John's second time on our WorkReduce Live series. He moderated a previous panel about the future of media planning tools. I'm going to turn this over mainly to John and Rishad, who I understand have known each other for some time, to lead the conversation and dig into whether business can have a soul and a purpose, which is something in 2020, now more than ever, really matters. So John, over to you.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for having us. I'm actually so lucky today. I've been involved in helping promote his book in a variety of ways and help kick off one of the cities of his tour, but truly one of the legends in the business. His insights, his thoughts, perspectives are just always worth reading. His Reinventing, his blog, his book, his Twitter handle, his photography is so fascinating. Rishad, welcome. How's Chicago? It's 85 here in San Francisco. How is it there?
It's nice at 80. It's in the 70s. It's sunny, and the river walk is open. And apparently, in a week or two, they'll let us get onto the beaches. But this is one of the states which is under control. So be careful.
We're all in this interesting world of defining 1, 2, and 3. We've got a few questions I want to talk about. Obviously, the book, but it's really interesting. I want to sort of frame the first question to pre-March 15th, which seems like decades ago in today's world, like decades ago. There was this thing called an impeachment hearing. I mean, that just seems like it was years ago. But in 2019, you wrote the book. It came out in January. The third part, decade, ready to go, get out there, typical book tour launch. How was that first 60 days? Was it, traditional book fair, city, in, out, and then I'm going to ask the post March 15th, but how was the kickoff?
So the kickoff was terrific because the book, which was published by HarperCollins, was in stores on Jan 28th, but I had access to, or we could early ship it to people as early as the first week of January. So between, I think, Jan 6th and March 12th, I did 28 flights, in those 60 days. One of them was San Francisco, where, obviously we did something with the SF ad community. I did something with PayPal, and the night I had some great wine. But it was amazing fun, and and we had some big events. I did something for 4,000 people at Twitter. I did something for Hulu, for Reddit, New York Times, all of that. And March 12th was my last flight. I flew back from Birmingham, Alabama, where I did something for lawyers, a major federation of Southern lawyers. And the week before that, I had been in Winston-Salem with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then that was it. And between March 12th and now, I have not traveled. not
I know
once.
it's painful because I mean, so many times I've seen you take sunsets, you
Oh,
know,
pictures.
or pictures around the world. We can talk about photography.
Yeah.
And Brian, WorkReduce, we started out at CES, getting ready for a big year, you know, meeting people,
We did.
getting everything going. So I
9
think,
weeks on the road for me, and then nothing after March 5th, right? And
Yeah.
just these four walls. It's crazy.
so March 14th, I'm flying back from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. There were 10 people on the plane. The next day, our mayor grounded us, sheltered us in place. We've all been there. So now let's talk about the new world, or as you affectionately call it, the next strange, which is, I just think is the best. We'll get into that in a few minutes. So talk about the, you know, the book was really written in 2019. I've read it pre-March 15th, and I've read it post-March 15th, and particularly 2 or 3 chapters today, I think, speak louder and more volumes than they did in January. You can almost substitute the feeling.
Yes.
Talk about post-March 15th.
So the 2 parts. One is what I was doing to promote the book and how the book works post-March 15th, right? So on the downside, when events stopped, right, the ability to basically sell 50, 20, you know, you were a big buyer of books, people were buying, you know, 100 books, 200 books. That stopped because there was no major event. And so that was like, okay, we do that. The other is people were, I mean, we are still scared of it, but if you remember the first 2 weeks, people were really freaked out. I mean,
really
about what was going on. And so the whole idea is screw books, screw anything, like what's going on. You know, that was the key thing. Post it, what I basically moved into is promoting the book through a combination of writing, webinars, and podcasts. And I keep a list of them. And to give you an idea, in between March 12th and June 18th, I basically done 37 podcasts, right, and 33 webinars. So I've done 70 events. And if you think about the number of working days, it's about 70 working days if you avoid Saturday, Sundays. So I basically do an event a day, which is more than I would be normally doing in a book tour. So, and then what I've also done is I've worked with the publisher and with other firms to find ways to get books in different formats to different people. And what has happened is actually my book sales, which were doing very well, then for about 2-3 weeks went to close to zero, suddenly started surging again because people started paying attention. I started doing this promotion. But the real reason that I believe it started surging is because the book became even more relevant post March 12th, right? That it was already relevant. But in fact, my publisher said, it looks like 6 of these 12 chapters have been optimized for COVID-19. But here's the key. Today I was speaking to somebody. So one of the things I did earlier today was this conversation. I was doing something with our friend John Patel. You know, so John Patel, one of the things he does, he hosts this thing called the Signal Conference from P&G, and they also now have a sort of a video show. So I was his guest for one of these things. But earlier on, someone else and he says, this book is more valid today than it was when I read it. But someone else basically said, you realize that this book actually speaks to and is even more relatable after Black Lives Matter. Okay. And I said, yes, because guess what? My publisher told me something that I now begin to is very true. He said, Rishad, here's what we're going to do. This book's going to be really successful, but you're not going to get much press coverage. So I said, why aren't I going to get press coverage? He said, because A, there's no scandal in the book, right? And B, you're talking about something human. You're not talking about an event or a news item. And basically they said, nobody knows how to cover humans. They know how to cover data. They know how to cover, you know, Trump. They know how to cover, you know, some scandal. But he says, nowhere in your book are you saying something scandalous. But you're basically talking about human truths and human truths with the world of technology and the world of change. So all that happened is the world accelerated. And what I was anticipating would happen 2 years or 3 years from now is all happening at the same time. And most leaders and most everybody, what are they grappling with? They're not grappling with the cool data, digital data side of their lives. They're dealing with anxiety. They're dealing with fear. They're dealing with uncertainty, which are all human. And those are all the things that I'm addressing in the book. And I have a whole chapter on diversity in the book, which is kind of interesting. So, and oddly, people said, like, how did you write that chapter? I said, because look at me. Do I look like a Caucasian person? You know, so whatever.
You know, Brian, just what he said, think about that. You know, obviously you've sort of changed the workflow where you've changed where people WorkReduce, obviously got how people thinking about work. Now more than ever, we think about work and humanity in such a very different way. Yes. I mean, those 6 chapters that Rishad alluded to, I don't know what they are, but I know what they would be for me about meetings and that turd on the table and, you know, and just different things like.
Yeah, the darker side of brighter screens, how to manage distributed.
Absolutely. So Brian, it's, you know, how are you seeing it? Very similar?
Well, you know, I would just say that the human side of, I think what you're talking about, Rishad, is what got me started with WorkReduce. You know, I started out with this idea that we were going to distribute advertising work via Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which is an API, right? A blind API into people. And as soon as I started working on there, I realized how human it was and how important the human side of it, you know, was. And so what we've been doing has been so people focused from day one. And it's like now, you know, all of a sudden our world has been accelerated the same way, you know, you're talking about, Rishad, through COVID. Suddenly what was a really unique thing for us, a fully distributed workforce and a fully virtual company, like everyone's got it, you know, so we're grappling with that, but also, you know, able to just talk to people about, we've been doing this for a while and how, you know, how that works and what our tips are and stuff like that. And just for the audience, anyone who's joining us late, we're going to have a video link for this. And please feel free to send your messages into the chat. We've got a couple already. The first one from Robert Brill. Well, actually, the first one is a compliment for you, John. Calling you the best dressed on here. I don't know, Rishad, I think you and I might dispute that, but we'll give it to him.
He's the best dressed, but we're the coolest dressed.
Amen.
Thanks, man. There you go.
Sure.
Thinking on your feet, I like that. And I think from Robert, you know, he wants to know, Rishad, you know, what exactly has changed now that you were anticipating? Like, what were you thinking? You said things have accelerated, right? Like, what were you thinking would happen? Is this like exactly what you're thinking?
The 3 things that I was expecting, I was expecting, number one, that distributed workforces would be more prevalent in the future, and it just accelerated because of COVID-19. Because my belief is once people understood that distributed, I'm not saying 100% distributed. So my basic belief in the book on managing the darker side of brighter screens is where you basically have people actually getting together at work, maybe a couple of days a week, but you work from home 3-4 days, right? You do the stuff that's about learning and collaboration and relationships at work, and you do all the other coding, email, reading at home. So that was sort of one. That's obviously, but you need education support and a bunch of other stuff, which is one. The second thing that I thought would accelerate was the knowledge that leadership was going to be much more about that. The softer side of leadership is the harder part of leadership. That managing people, inspiring people, empathy, understanding human fragility, which has become very clear both with COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, a whole bunch of other things, like the emotion. These are things that leaders have to deal with, the hard stuff. And so that has also accelerated, both because of COVID-19's, you know, sort of fragility of society. And the third, which I've always basically believed, was that the single most important thing that companies have are their employees, right? Or their resources or their partners, and how do you access? So a lot of what you do is you allow people to basically access amazing people to get work done, right? But in addition, so they can either focus on the stuff that they do particularly well while you focus on other stuff, right? You can basically go up and down. So those are the things that, in many ways, that outside of how you deal with people, which I'm not because I don't work with you all, but two of the three you already do, which is the importance of employees and distributed workforces.
Rishad, our L. Ward, how are you, my friend? Good to see you. Great question, because I want to lead into something that came down yesterday in Harvard Business Review for both of you. What can people do with C-level execs who have few soft skills? We know them.
Yeah, so there are a few things that are worth doing. The first one is I truly believe that most people have both good and bad leadership skills. And the difference between them is that the bad leaders have primarily the bad ones most of the time and not enough of it, but they have the germs of the good ones. Is the first and most important thing that people have to do is you need the carrot and the stick, okay? And the stick basically is either incentives or disincentive plans. So like I've truly basically believed, if you want to adjust, for instance, the number of African Americans in the boardroom, right? You incentivize the board and the CEO to make it possible in 2 years or less, it'll happen. If on the other hand, it's sending a press release and singing Kumbaya songs, it won't happen. So one of the key things is for somebody who is that boss's boss, other people to say, these are things that you need to do. If you don't do this, you have a problem. So that happens to be the stick in this part. The other part, which is the carrot, is training. One of the interesting things is people don't know what they don't know. And as you get older, people actually are scared of change. That's why I have this chapter called Change Sucks. So sometimes the worst bosses are the worst bosses because they don't know how not to be a worst boss, and nobody goes and talks with them. And somewhere in these organizations, this was something that I served as a role at Publicis, at least with my management, is I would go up to a Jack Clues or I would go up to a Maurice Levy, and I would tell them shit that very often got me thrown out of the room. I mean, literally, it wasn't out of the building or out of the company, but it was like, I want to see you for the next 24 hours. You have so, pilfered my life, right? And it was basically, I was telling them they didn't know what they were talking about, right? Or I was coming there with saying, do you really know what's going on in this company? Because people think you're full of shit. They're all saying nice things to you, but it's full of shit. And so the whole idea is, a lot of these people don't have people who go around and tell them, here's the problem, right? And all of us know they have a problem, but none of us are brave enough to tell them they have a problem. So first is they got to know. Second is they got to have an incentive plan to basically change. And then they got to basically obviously have, some sort of training to change. Now, if they don't, you got to get rid of them fast.
Rishad, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think there's many things about COVID-19 that have caused us all to stop and think. And one of the words that I love about the book, particularly when you told me, writing in the title, is a word that gets so lost in business, and that's the word soul.
Yep.
You didn't have purpose, you didn't have authenticity,
yep.
You had soul. I recently heard somebody talk about the world is no longer, which we talked the other day, B2B or B2C, it's human to human.
Yes.
And that ethos is soul. And the two chapters that impact me the most right now, more often than not, with both working with clients, this isn't about me, it's about the two of you, is change in meetings.
Yes.
Because you're advocating more meetings and don't be afraid of change.
Yes.
That's scary. And people are just so afraid of both.
Yeah, so the two reasons. So the chapter on change is called Manage Change, Recognizing That It Sucks. Okay, so, but what I tell people is while change sucks, irrelevance is even worse. And I define how hard I find change to happen myself. And on paper, as I explained to people, when I was working at Publicis, I worked for two guys for 25 years. So I had two bosses for 25 years. And both those clowns decided to retire on me, which then forced me to say, like, why am I hanging around? Okay, but that was, right. So one was Maurice Levy, one was Jack Clues. Now, Maurice hasn't really retired. He's a big executive chairman hanging around, etc. But that was one. Two, I work for the same company for 38. I've lived in Chicago for 40, and I met my wife when we were 12, 48 years ago, right? So I hate change. It's proved. But if you look at my career, you'll say, but wait, he's driven a lot of change. That's because I realize how much change sucks, right? But I also realized that irrelevance. And what I began to realize is the more you want to things that you like to stay the same, the more you will have to change. Correct. Because my belief is I like, right, working for these people, but I got to learn new skills in order to make sure I work for these people. I like working for these clients, but clients are going to need new things. I better change, otherwise they won't keep me, right? So what began to happen is change actually can make a good thing happen. But the reason I also change sucks is often when people come to you, they say you change. Is, for instance, let's say you have a great bottle of wine. You'll say, let's drink it together, right? You don't say, go buy this bottle of wine and drink it. Change is the only thing where someone comes to you and say, change is good for you, go do it. Yeah. And I say, if it's so good, how come you're not doing it? So that's one of the key things. But in order to make change happen, and this is the key thing, is A, recognize it's difficult, and to overcome it, you have to incentivize people to change. You have to communicate and you have to train. A lot of companies just stop at the PR of it, but you have to communicate and communicate and communicate because I'm finding it difficult to change. You got to incentivize me to change, and you got to train me to change. And give me skill sets. It's so easy when people say, become more digital to senior management, right? Now, senior management grew up completely in analog. And unlike the two of us who figured out, I don't know, by mistake, how to learn this stuff, okay, their whole stuff is like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't look like a fool. The other is, until recently, the analog businesses were the big businesses driving all the profit. I'm in charge of an empire, right? So the incentive systems were all wrong. The training was all wrong, and the communication was all wrong. And so whenever I go into now a C-level executive or a boardroom, I say, can you just show me your incentive, communication, and training plans? I don't want to see anything else. Show me those three, and I'll tell you whether you can make change happen or not. So that's the change thing. The schedule more meetings, is my basic belief is most people, when they go to meetings at work, are not going to meetings. They're going to stare-a-thons, okay? So a stare-a-thon is where we're all looking at a screen, either a PowerPoint somewhere up there, an Excel spreadsheet on our iPads, or we're looking at our phones. We don't look at each other. We don't have a communication. And my belief is what makes business work is human relationships and conversations, which is why I say schedule more meetings. But it should be a meeting, not a stare-a-thon across screens.
All right.
A meaningful conversation.
Very meaningful. Rishad, as you look around the world, thank you, David, for this question. This is from Orange County, so all the Californians are weighing in across America. We talk about transparency and the lack of transparency in terms of geopolitical leadership. Boy, that's pretty wild. How does that impact brand communication trends? As we progress into the great acceleration via the Great Recession, what are the best tools to use to sift out the noise from the nuggets in terms of real-time data? And by the way, thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And so I believe that one of the key parts of leading with soul is something which I call integrity. So there are 5 characteristics of leading with soul: capability, integrity, vulnerability, empathy, and inspiration. And one of them is integrity. And under integrity, I have 4 characteristics. Transparency happens to be one, which is what you're talking about. Trust, data-driven is sort of a third one, and looking at other people's point of view. That's when you get basically integrity. I believe that you need to be able to explain why you make decisions, share as much of the data that is not either privacy or otherwise infused so people can understand why you make decisions, and be as real as you can possibly in making decisions. So that's the first thing, which is, and by the way, build a case for the exact opposite of what you believe when you even look at the data. So get people to interrogate the decisions. And so that's one thing. Now, try to make the difference between the noise and the signal. There are 2 ways of differentiating the noise and the signal that I use. There are many ways, but there are 2 that I use, but I'm sure there are smart ways. The first one is I try to get lots of different people to look at the same data. Because what I began to realize is we look at data from where we come from and not what the data is actually telling us. So there's a very famous movie called Rashomon by Kurosawa, where 4 people come upon a forest and tell a completely different story. You will often find the best companies doing the stupidest things because they've got the same type of person with the same type of background looking at the data. So, interrogate the data. One is by having different people look at it, but the second one is to say, what if the exact opposite of what the data was saying was true? What would we see? Would we see something different? So that happens to be one, which is make sure that you're looking at data from a diverse point of view. The second one is a little bit different, which is, does it make sense from a human perspective? Which is, you see some data and then you sort of look at it and say, do I really do that? So I'll give you an idea. And this is something that, it's a very simple exercise. And when I say this to you, you'll understand why that's a chapter called Too Much Math, Too Little Meaning. I go to people and they say, oh, we never thought about it this way. So we're all about data, right? Data, oh, fantastic. And so that you'll know, I have an advanced degree in mathematics. And if you look at my background, I know something about digital and data, okay? So I'm not an anti-math, anti-data, anti-digital cat. So with that, I believe data is so important. It's like electricity. Because for the last few years, we've been going from the steam engine age to the electric age, we're getting all worked up about the switch from steam engine to electricity. However, tell me which company today differentiates itself on the use of electricity. Okay. I believe even to this date, with the exception of maybe a handful of companies, maybe a Google and Amazon or Facebook, I don't believe that most companies can differentiate themselves on their use of data, the data they have or how they use it. It's the people, the cultures, and everything else that they bring to it that actually adds the value. Because if that wasn't true, then only data-driven companies should be owning everything. But that's one. But here's the other one. Look at the last 10 decisions you made. And look at the most valuable companies in Europe on market cap. The most valuable companies in Europe in market cap, 3 of the 5 have names like Louis Vuitton, right? And Keurig, which happen to be luxury brands, okay? Now let me ask somebody, look at your last 10 decisions. Tell me which of those 10 decisions were primarily data-driven. And I would basically say less than 7 of the 10 would be data-driven decisions.
And we know academic, that's an F.
Yes. So what basically means is we are not making any data-driven decisions, but we're basically telling everybody that we're looking at data to make all of our decisions. We are lying to ourselves. And what I proved to people was a company that's fixated on data, their stock price does worse than a company that works with data plus all. Time and time again. The same company with a leader who's fixated not on data and stacking and windows and yelling and screaming like Bomber, who's replaced by Satya Nadella, the value increases 5-fold. When the person stops fixating about Windows and thinks about the cloud, stops making backward-looking investments called Nokia, stops stack rating and goes from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. So the reality of it is, even the people who are making data-driven decisions, my stuff is, you're an idiot. You don't know how to make a data-driven decision. And by the way, if all your decisions are data-driven decisions, you are going to lose your job. A machine can do it faster. So anybody who tells me about this, my stuff is, you don't even understand what you're talking about. Get out of the room.
All right. I got to both of you. This is a good question. You've talked about how often you've been candid with your CEOs, and you've also been candid in the marketplace. I think people appreciate this. I can see how valuable and powerful this can be, but it can be career limiting if not done properly. I love those last words. Any advice for people who want to give candid feedback to their CEO on how to approach so they don't get fired? And I know a couple of people on here that I see that are really struggling with that question.
Sure. So one of the things that I would basically do is buy my book if you can afford it.
I'm gonna give a copy of that and a bottle of wine away.
Right, but it's basically, depending on how you buy, it's $15 to $20. So hopefully you can I don't
Yes.
take out a mortgage and buy it. But basically, there's a chapter in the book which is called The Turd on the Table. And in it is, I specifically have, which I'm going to tell you, obviously you don't have to buy the book, but there's much more detail there. There's specific things where I explain when you're younger in the organization, how you can do this, right? Because I say if you're senior in the organization, how can you make sure that people speak up? But if you're younger in the organization, how do you speak up to bosses without getting fired? Remember, I kept my job my entire career. I'm still attached to the company. So how do you do it? There are three ways you do it. The first way you do it is you don't actually talk about the issue at hand. You talk about something else. So you don't talk about your cat. So when I'm trying to explain to someone what they're doing is wrong, I don't talk about their category. To this day, when I go to a client and I'm trying to explain to them that what they're doing is stupid, I actually talk about a different category and we discuss the other category. And if I've done a good enough job, they see themselves in it.
Amen.
And they often smile and they say, smart. You just told me I sucked by showing me that someone else sucked. Okay? Or some other company did something else. So the idea is, if you directly take on somebody, even if they were not your boss, they go into defensive mode, because people go into defensive mode. So to open it up, you talk about a different thing, something different. The second is the way you get them to sort of basically learn is about how to sort of get better at these things, is you ask them, let's say when I wanted to get people interested in digital and senior management, I wasn't talking about digital. I would find out from their assistants, or I would find out from their employees, what was their passion. And then I would go to them with a little piece of paper that says, there's this thing called the internet, or there's this thing called the America Online. Go in there, I'm giving you this thing, and just put in these things. And whether it was fly fishing, or whether it was football, or whether it was collecting, railway toys, they do that. And they say, wait, what's this? And I said, isn't that interesting? Now imagine if somebody was trying to buy your products and services and not railway toys. Because then they would say, this railway company is doing a terrible job online. So I said, have you thought about what you're doing online? So that was the other one, is follow their passion. So one is take them this way. The other is follow their passion. The third is, remember, attacking them directly is not the way. So what you basically do, and never do this in public. So if possible, ask them for advice. And then somewhere in the advice, you can give advice. So, I always make no mistake, when I went to my management, I told them they were like full of shit. Long before that, they basically told me that I live in a pool of diarrhea. I'm not even full of shit. I'm surrounded by it. Okay.
I'm trying to imagine that visual. Thank you.
So the whole idea is, my stuff is, you're calling me like a stinking person. I can do that too. But first, you got to do that. So a lot of it is about relationship. But remember, people are sensitive. So by either going sideways or going this way, or a passion point, then they will see it, and then they'll start asking you questions. And those are the ways to do it. And I'll give you one final story, which is a story that one of my bosses told me many years ago, about 15 to 20 years ago, when I was an account director. I was getting really worked up because my client wasn't listening to me. Okay, I had the facts, I had the data. And he says, you're just swinging all the stuff at them. What is this? So I said, why? So he says, here's the deal. He says, Rishad, let me tell you a story. What if you were in a tugboat? So I said, okay. This is how the people used to talk in those days. So my stuff is, what are you talking about? He says, suppose you had a tugboat. So I said, okay, I got a tugboat. And you are sitting near some land in your tugboat, and you see this big cruise ship that is coming and going to hit the land. And you've got a tugboat, and you've got a chain, and you've got this cruise ship coming. What are you going to do, Rishad? So I said, I'll take the chain and I'll throw it on the goddamn cruise ship, and I'll basically, with the tugboat, I'll take it away from the stupid land. He says, yeah, how are you going to do it? So I said, I'll take it away from the stupid land. He says, no, that's not right, because what's going to happen is your chain is going to break, because the momentum of the boat is going this way. You're going this way, the chain will break. So he says, you put the chain on and you go in the direction of the land, right? You don't go in the direction opposite, and then you slowly start curving so the chain doesn't break. So he says, you first get on and start listening to what they're talking about, and then slowly, gradually change them.
Um, my line, because I don't like to use the, I've been careful on the turtle on the table. Mine is, have you ever seen an ugly baby? Heck yes, we've all seen ugly babies, but we would never tell anybody they have an ugly baby. So we have to be graceful in our language. I like your approach better. There was this is really for both of you. There was an article that came out yesterday in the Harvard Business Review that said, post-COVID, the future belongs to generalists. There's an off-quoted, the man with the hammer, everything looks like nails. But what if the man had a hammer, a screwdriver, and a wrench? So maybe we're thinking too specific, and the future is going to be the generalist. And it's a really interesting article, and I read that in light of some conversations with a couple of people on here yesterday about where they're going, talking about careers, and I think the generalist thing made a lot of sense, because both of you deal in thinking about the importance of talent, and the more human you are, the more experience and emotion that you bring to, I think, the workplace.
It is, but I'll give you a slight variation on this. I actually believe that the future belongs to the curious specialist, okay? And the learning specialist, because here's why. The issue with a specialist often is two things. They think very narrowly, and that particular specialty falls out of favor. You could be learning MS-DOS, and then now this Python, and God knows what else. Or one day you're learning something. So I believe that the ability to be curious, which is looking at different things, your ability to learn, right, is very important. And I think also your ability to interconnect with people, which is a friendly API, to be a hedgehog and not a porcupine, are important. But why do I believe to a certain extent in specialization? Okay, because one of the key I tell people is you need to learn and grow, and your specialties might change. So if you look at my background, I was a media person, a creative person, digital person, staff person, startup person. I kept learning and changing. But at some particular stage, it's because when people hire you, they don't hire you for general skills, right? They hire you because you've done something. So, in effect, I built my career at Publicis by basically being the future change innovation guy. But I could do a pretty good job sort of operating and doing a few other things, but that wasn't my big skill set, right? But I understood how important operating was. I worked very well with the CEOs and the CEOs and the CFOs. But I learned what their new things were. So it's a combination of those two, because in effect, especially as we live in this distributed world, right? People say, I need to add these people to the team. So my model is, it's like the Hollywood model, where in a Hollywood movie, a lot of people come together. So you've got the director, the caterer, etc. But you better be a director who understands how important everybody else is. You're learning new skill sets, like, hey, the future might be about television and less about movies. So it's the learning, curious, friendly API specialist.
Brian, because of what
I love that. Yeah.
Any reaction to that?
I mean, what I'd say, my experience starting a company, right, is that you have to have, I agree, like some specialty. You've got to have some rigor behind, what and the ability to kind of, tackle a problem in depth. And then it's really important to be able to synthesize across a lot of different fields, right? As a founder, right, you're being asked to figure out in my case, figure out a financing strategy when your background is in software, right? And so you're always being pushed to do these, different things that are maybe out of your wheelhouse, and you're guaranteed, I think, as a founder, to hit something that's not your strong or sweet spot, right? But you've got to be able to kind of look at an area and assess the credibility of experts. And you've got to, I think, to your point, Rishad, have a lot of curiosity to do that. And then you have to have some kind of depth and rigor in something, right? You have to have really gone deep and tried hard, somewhere to, I think, to be able to do that. So I like your approach, Rishad, more than saying it's just a generalist, right? It's a generalist who's got some rigor, in one area.
Yeah, usually you find that some of the best leaders, the way that we became a generalist besides rigor is they sometimes had like, they grew multiple rigor things. So if you actually see the most successful people, they've done 4 or 5 different things, but they specialized, they connected it all.
I've got a couple more comments, and we're if anybody is looking for something, put in part of your daily read. Obviously, follow Rishad on Twitter, which is fascinating. Engaging conversations with him all the time. But get his blog, Reinventing by Rishad. He's had 2 in the last couple days this week that is just absolutely powerful. Sort of like almost the culmination of the book version 2. And then he did one, I guess it was last week. Time is something that I feel like, just somewhat destroyed, where you talk about the 4 Ps.
Yes.
Where you talk about perspectives, point of view, provocations, and plan of action. And when you say 4 Ps, most of us think product, price, place, and promotion. But when you read the article, they really do lead in that continuum that is a great way to, I think, market. I always have to ask this question. I think it's very important. Obviously, you see me sitting in a different place than in my house. I think what separates us as human from animals is our passion. I know your passion is photography, one of them anyway, because I have seen some sunsets. I keep telling you should do a coffee table book of sunsets.
Yes, a lot of people have said that.
Because this, we've talked about it. Your passion is photography, and I think that helps you keep a perspective and a lens, obviously a lens into the world. And I know Brian likes wine. I like wine. So I think passions are important. And I think it keeps us human. Any last comments? Anything I should have asked? Anybody?
I think
we've got a couple
there's a couple of
Rishad.
questions.
There's one from the chat going back to Rachel Barrick. She asks, how much capital investment should you, I think as you being a company, make in doing good? For a company like Publicis that manages to a bottom line, as a manager, how do you find resources and time to do it, knowing that doing good usually has to happen in free time, which is scarce? You mentioned investing in doing good. How does that work economically? So practically, how do we inject soul into a business while being held to account by our boards and CFOs?
Sure.
I think is another way to look at it.
First, I just put a quick asterisk and just I continue to be an advisor to the company and have a great relationship, and I'm neither an employee nor a director. So when I speak myself without. In the past, I had to be connected to the company. I'm no longer, but I'm not anti-company, so I'm completely aligned with. But here's the key. I think the biggest investment you need to make if you want to do good is in your employees. Okay, so so my basic belief is I believe the future. I've written it. We talked about environment, sustainability, and governance. I think that is yesterday's ESG. Tomorrow's ESG is employees, society, and government, which is, in effect, if you can't look after your employees, train them, have a diverse workforce, let them follow their passions, invest and build their skills. If you don't look after the society around you, which is where your factories are or where your employees are primarily clustered, even if they're working from home, and if you don't realize that government actually matters, that there's a lot of stuff that only government can basically do, that which means, by the way, you have to pay taxes and things like that, then everything else is like bullshit. It's like basically just putting out press releases. So I think my basic belief is invest in your employees' passion, go out of your way to hire diverse workforces, because diverse workforces are more profitable. If nothing else, for only reason is if you have people from diverse points of view, you will make more money. So even if you don't like people of different people, but the other reason why you want to do it is with future trends. And some of you have heard this, and some people will get all pissed off, but what the hell? Okay, I already pissed off a whole bunch of people. But there's some forces in the world that are unstoppable. And I will end this with this thing, which is when people basically said, like, how have you succeeded? I said, look, I fooled a lot of people, but I also figured out what some key trends were. And I made absolutely, always I remember that in addition to having great bosses, having amazing people around you to do the talent and having luck, all of that's interesting. What you could do is the following, which is never go against a trend. And if you can find a trend, I mean, I'm talking about a global trend, not like because everybody is saying someone sucks, you have to say someone sucks, but I'm talking about global trends. So to me, the global trends are globalization is a global trend, despite what people think right now with Brexit and building a wall. Demographic shifts are a global trend, and technology is a global trend. But in demographics, this is something that people don't understand, including in the United States. Next year, the United States under 21 will become Caucasian minority. Okay, so my stuff is, if you don't like the way I look, you better kill everybody under 21 fast. No tweeting, no building a goddamn wall, no taking away people's votes gonna work. It's done. Okay, and that's the whole thing. Facts are stubborn things. You can't tweet away facts. And my whole stuff is, why aren't people just saying bullshit? The reality is here. Reality sucks. You might not like it, but it's here. That's one of the biggest things with leaders is leaders face reality, right? They don't run away from it. And that's one of the key things I try to keep explaining to people.
I love the
We have another, oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
I love the ESG.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. That's really true. We've got a lot of questions, and I think we probably have pushed the time. Our friend Michael Donnelly says hello. He's enjoyed this. A lot of other good people on there.
Yes. Are we good to the top of the hour? Or do you want to cut it off
I'm
here?
free.
Let's, John, if you can keep going, let's do these. I think the good one from Rommel Pintino here, who says, Rishad, what is your #1 tip for someone who is joining a new company and leading a new team remotely? Thanks. I'll jump in on that one after you go, Rishad.
You go first. You're the expert. You're the expert.
I mean, I think to take a piece, page out of your book here, Rishad, I think it's to keep it very human, right? And, to bridge that gap with your remote employees. So it's really about getting to know the team members on a personal basis, even though you're on the other side of a Zoom call. And that's something that's hard and takes time. And, one of the things I try to do, with our employees and our teams is always leave time to catch up a little bit, right? We try to keep our meetings pretty quick. We're very focused on getting stuff done, and our calls don't drag on, but we do leave room to say, hey, how are the kids? How's the weather? What's going on? And you've got to build up that kind of trust over time and build that relationship. And it's never the same as meeting them, in person. And our whole team was supposed to be in Austin just a couple of weeks ago. We were doing in-person, team summits, and they were great. I love them, and it's so great to be able to just share a meal with somebody and open a bottle of wine and we've gone from being virtual and remote companies who could do that sometimes to fully virtual, fully separated from ourselves, and now sometimes segregated, from our friends. And it's a lot of extra work, I think, to bridge it.
I would say I agree with everything you say, Robel. There's one thing I would suggest is in my book, the chapter on have more meetings, right, basically tells you how to run meetings. And those things work very well with remote workforces. I didn't realize I was writing it for remote workforces, but they're the exact things, like for instance, how are you doing, right? And a whole bunch of other things. But what is extremely important, I think, in all of these is you try to keep in your mind the three things that I tell people is whenever you're trying to build a team when you're new, is be generous. Okay, be generous by asking them about themselves, be generous with your time, just be generous. Because people get surprised with generosity, right? Which is people just get surprised. It's one of the biggest, it's the biggest things that I've always used. When people say, can I meet you? I said, yes. How much is it gonna cost? Free. Okay, what does that mean? Right? So I said, like, why? So it's generosity. The second one is empathy, which I've talked about before. And the last one is energy. You want to leave people believing in themselves. You want people to believe that they can do the job at hand. And you want people to believe what the next steps are and be clear about them. So explain that. And if you can, and those are all capable to do remote, but you'd have to do a little extra work to do it remote. But those are the things that I would basically do, building on, what you've said.
I think those are extraordinarily powerful. I want to comment on it, but I love this next question. I know the answer, but I want to hear you talk about it. Passion question: what do you shoot your photography with? This is from a Canon guy. What do you shoot? I know what you shoot, but everybody loves to like what camera.
All right. So I use two cameras. One is a Leica MP. So it's a Leica M10,
I thought that would be
but
the
MP
answer.
version. Yeah. So it's a Leica, and then at other times it's a Apple iPhone 11 Max Pro.
Probably the single greatest change of the 21st century is the iPhone.
Yeah.
To be able to picture phone, whether it's
right.
whatever.
But what I will tell people that that this is the key thing to your stuff. The reason I became a good photographer was because, very much like everything else, I studied great photography. And I have about 30, 40 books on photography. And eventually, the most important thing is to train your eye to wait and frame. Most of everything is waiting and framing. Technology is the third part of it, but waiting and framing.
I think we've seen the impact of that recently in the political environment, of the impact of what you've just said. Many years ago, there was an article, I think one of the greatest articles ever in HBR. It said, "What makes a great salesman?" I think you can change it. And it talked about ego and empathy and the balance of the two. And when you talk about empathy, you know, that article was written when the world was very Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, commute in, blah, blah, blah. Now, I think that third word that comes in there, I love the word energy, because I think post-COVID, the routines that we all know, Brian, Rishad, the routines that we all know, they've been thrown out the window, and we've established new ones, like going to the grocery store at 11 o'clock during the day and looking for detergent, which is something I would have never done during the week. You know.
Well, see, that's because you're a young man. I go during senior hours at 7 a.m. because I'm highly vulnerable.
But you know, my last question to both of you is, of all the routine of the change in your work habits since, you know, what I call post Ides of March, has there been one that you really like this is going to go forth, that like, this has really been great?
Doing these webinars for me has been number one. You know, we took tens of thousands of dollars that we were going to spend on live events in person in New York, and I upgraded my Zoom subscription for an additional $150 to have more people in the webinar version. And as a result, I'm getting to have conversations like this and, you know, speak to a much broader audience, and it's been really amazing. How about you, Rishad?
So I would say there are two things. One, which I will do much less of, which is what you basically mentioned. On average, I used to travel 140 times a year. And I don't think on business, I'm likely to travel more than one time a month, if that. And because I found a lot of this is much easier. So that is something I'm going to stop doing or do much less of, which is number one. What I appreciate, and I will do more of, are the small things that you don't really realize. And, you know, talking about photography, one of my more popular photographs on social media was the first time after 85 days that I got to have a draft beer at a pizza outside.
I saw that one. That
right?
looked like a great pizza and a great beer.
Yeah. And so the idea basically is, as I said, you don't know what you got until you miss it. And these small things I'm paying a lot more attention to, which is, and you know, some of us have been fortunate not to get the disease. Some of us have been fortunate not to have a near one get it or die. But all of us are familiar with people who've come very close to death or who have died over the past 3 months. So my belief is many of us have suffered a near-death experience, right? And, you know, John, you know this well, and I know this from my wife. When you have one of those, it changes the way you look at the world, Amen. Right? And Amen. To a great extent, lots of people are changing the way they look at the world. And for those who are on this, I'll give you two pieces of stuff. One, building on John's stuff. If you go to rishadt.wordpress.com, that's rishadt.wordpress.com. That's my Reinventing blog. That has this 12-page note on what I think the world will be. it's worth reading. It's 20 minutes, but it's worth reading.
Yes.
If you don't like to read it because you don't want to read it, what I will tell you is I'm talking to 5 Fortune 500 CEOs who've read that, and I'm consulting with them just because they read that. Because they basically said, in this 20-minute read, I got more intelligence, insights, and ways to work than I've got from a whole bunch of consulting companies and conferences. So, and it's, by the way, free. And
that was how I was gonna, tell everybody to make sure they did that. Obviously, I've sent it out to people. Follow you. You're, the most valuable currency that we all have is time, and you are extraordinarily gracious with your time, and more important than your intelligence. Brian, thank you for letting me get to ask Rishad, because I
John, thank you for helping me.
Uh,
You're a big agent of my book.
Well, because I like it. Now, I had promised. I got several books. I love giving them away. I wish you could sign it. And as you can tell, I'm a cork dork. So I've got a bottle of wine from one of my favorite little producers. I don't know how to give it away because we didn't have any kind of contest. But I see some people on here.
I could choose at random from the attendees, John, if you want
I'm
to do
not
that.
going to do that because I'll piss some people off. Cassidy and you and we'll go through and pick one or two. I'll send a couple out. But I want to thank you. Thank you for this 55 minutes. I think we become better when we think of ourselves as human. And I do think post March 15th, I'm with you. I'm very blessed. I'm a very optimistic person because I have seen the bottom, and it's not a pretty place. And when you go up, you feel great every day. So thank you. So thank you both. And
thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
On the West Coast, so it's great. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
We'll pick a winner.